June 8, 1944. Villers-Bocage, Normandy. The morning mist still clung to the Norman hedgerows when Trooper Joe Ekins of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry spotted movement through the narrow slit of his gunner's periscope. 400 yards ahead, emerging from behind a stone wall like predators stalking prey, came 3 Panzer Mark V's. Panthers. The tanks that had terrorized British armored regiments since Kursk, their sloped frontal armor designed to laugh off every shell the Allies could throw at them. Ekins didn't panic. His Sherman looked identical to the hundreds of others rolling through France that summer. Same boxy silhouette, same American olive drab paint, same white star on the turret. But inside that turret sat something the Germans had never encountered before. Something that would change tank warfare forever. A 17-pounder gun, the most powerful anti-tank weapon the British had ever mounted in a tank. The barrel was so long they'd had to cut away the front of the turret and build a massive counterweight at the back just to balance it. The Germans called these modified Shermans the long-nosed bastards when they finally figured out what they were facing. But on that June morning in Normandy, the Panther commanders had no idea what was about to hit them. They saw just another Sherman, another easy kill to add to their tally. They were wrong. Ekins centered his crosshairs on the lead Panther's glacis plate, that supposedly impenetrable sloped armor that made German tankers feel invincible. His commander, Sergeant Gordon, gave the order. Fire. The 17-pounder spoke with a violence that dwarfed every other tank gun the British had fielded. The shell, a 17-pound solid shot traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, crossed the 400 yards in less than half a second. It punched through the Panther's frontal armor like a nail through tin. The German tank exploded, ammunition cooking off in a pillar of black smoke. The other 2 Panthers, suddenly aware they were facing something new and terrible, tried to back away. Too late. Ekins was already loading his second round. To understand the shock of that moment, you need to understand what British tank crews had endured for 3 years of war. Since 1941, they'd been outgunned, out-armored, and outmatched by nearly every German tank they faced. The Valentine, the Crusader, the early Churchills, all carried guns that could barely scratch German armor at ranges where German shells ripped through British steel like paper. Tank crews died in burning metal coffins, knowing their weapons were obsolete before they even reached the battlefield. The Germans had the Tigers, the Panthers, tanks that could kill British armor at 2,000 yards while remaining invulnerable to return fire. British tank development had become a national scandal by 1943. The War Office demanded answers. How could the nation that invented the tank in 1916 now field machines so inferior? How could British industry, which had survived the Blitz and outproduced Germany in aircraft, fail so completely at armored warfare? The answer was complicated, bureaucratic, and ultimately tragic. British tank designers had prioritized reliability and armor over firepower. They'd assumed their 6-pounder and 2-pounder guns would be sufficient. They'd been catastrophically wrong. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American industrial might was pumping out Sherman tanks by the thousands. The M4 Sherman wasn't perfect. Its riveted armor was prone to spalling, sending deadly metal fragments through the crew compartment. Its gasoline engine earned it the nickname Tommy Cooker from the Germans and Ronson from the crews themselves, after the cigarette lighter that advertised "Lights first time, every time." Its 75mm gun, adequate in 1942, was hopelessly outclassed by 1944. But the Sherman had one overwhelming advantage. America could build them faster than Germany could destroy them. British factories were already stretched thin building Churchills and Cromwells. Adopting the Sherman through Lend-Lease made strategic sense. British crews would drive American tanks, but they'd face German Panthers and Tigers with American guns that couldn't penetrate German armor beyond point-blank range. The mathematics were brutal. A Sherman could kill a Panther from the front at maybe 300 yards if the shot was perfect. A Panther could kill a Sherman from the front at 2,000 yards, every time. British tankers called it murder. Some units lost entire squadrons in single engagements. The solution came from an unexpected source. The 17-pounder anti-tank gun had entered service in 1942. Mounted on a wheeled carriage, it was devastating. Its armor-piercing shells could punch through any German tank at ranges exceeding a mile. Infantry anti-tank crews loved it. But getting these guns into position was suicide. German tanks would spot the towed guns and destroy them before they could engage. What the British needed was mobility, armor protection, and that 17-pounder gun combined. They needed the Firefly. The idea was simple. Take a Sherman, remove its 75mm gun, install a 17-pounder. Reality was anything but simple. The 17-pounder was massive, weighing nearly 3 tons with its breech mechanism. The Sherman's turret wasn't designed for anything that size. The gun was so long, 56 calibers, that the barrel extended nearly 15 feet beyond the front of the turret. Initial tests were disasters. The gun's recoil was so violent it threatened to tear the turret ring apart. The ammunition was so large that the Sherman could only carry 36 rounds instead of the 90 rounds of 75mm ammunition a standard Sherman carried. Major George Witheridge of the Ministry of Supply led the conversion project. His team at the Royal Arsenal worked through the winter of 1943, solving problems the Americans had deemed impossible. They redesigned the turret, cutting away the front gun shield and building a massive armored box around the breech. They installed a counterweight at the back of the turret to balance the gun's weight. They modified the recoil system, strengthening every mount and brace. They tested, failed, modified, and tested again. By February 1944, they had a working prototype. The Sherman Firefly looked different from regular Shermans, but only if you knew what to look for. The gun barrel was longer, yes, but not dramatically so to an untrained eye. The muzzle brake, that distinctive cylinder at the barrel's end, designed to reduce recoil, was the main giveaway. British crews would later remove these or disguise them to avoid German attention. The turret was boxier, more angular. But in the chaos of combat, at ranges beyond a few hundred yards, a Firefly could pass for a standard Sherman. This was crucial. British tactical doctrine called for 1 Firefly per troop, the 4-tank basic unit. 3 regular Shermans with 75mm guns, 1 Firefly with the 17-pounder. The Firefly would hide among the regular tanks, indistinguishable to German observers. When Panthers or Tigers appeared, the regular Shermans would engage at close range, drawing fire. The Firefly would hang back, invisible in the formation, and kill German armor at ranges they thought were safe. It was deception through uniformity, camouflage through numbers. Production began in March 1944. British and Polish conversion centers worked around the clock, modifying Sherman tanks as they arrived from America. The Americans had been skeptical. Why waste time modifying perfectly good tanks when you could build more new ones? But the British had learned hard lessons in North Africa and Italy. They needed the 17-pounder. They needed it now. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, the British and Canadian armies had roughly 200 Fireflies ready for action. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The first Fireflies landed on Gold Beach and Juno Beach on D-Day itself. Crews had barely trained on them. The guns were so new that ammunition supply was uncertain. Doctrine was still being written. But British tankers took one look at that massive gun and felt something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Finally, they had a weapon that could fight German armor on equal terms. Finally, they weren't driving death traps. The 17-pounder gave them a chance. Trooper Gordon Brown of the Staffordshire Yeomanry described his first sight of the Firefly. "We'd been fighting in Cromwell's, fast little things with pop guns. We'd lost half the squadron in 2 weeks. Then they brought up these Shermans with the long guns. The gunnery sergeant said, 'This'll punch through a Panther at a mile.' We didn't believe him. We'd heard promises before. But when we test-fired at a knocked-out German tank, the shell went through the front armor, through the engine, out the back, and kept going. We believed him then." The Germans, meanwhile, had no idea what was coming. Intelligence reports from Normandy in early June noted increased Sherman activity, but nothing unusual. The Panthers and Tigers continued hunting British armor with impunity. German tank commanders had developed a almost casual contempt for Allied armor. 5 Shermans for every Panther was the exchange rate, and Germany could afford those losses less than the Allies, or so they thought. June 13th, 1944. The village of Villers-Bocage again, 5 days after Joe Aiken's first kills. This small Norman town would become the proving ground for the Firefly, though not in the way anyone expected. The British 7th Armored Division, the famed Desert Rats, pushed into Villers-Bocage as part of a flanking maneuver. They encountered Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, the most successful tank ace in history, commanding Tiger 131. What followed was a master class in German armor superiority. Wittmann's single Tiger destroyed or disabled 25 British tanks and vehicles in 15 minutes. The 7th Armored fell back in disorder. It was a disaster, a reminder that even with Fireflies, German armor remained deadly. But buried in the after-action reports was a crucial detail. 3 Tigers had been knocked out during the battle, all 3 by 17-pounder hits, all 3 from ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The Firefly had proven itself even in defeat. The tactical implications rippled through British Armor Command. Brigadier Leslie Cracroft, commanding the 22nd Armored Brigade, issued new standing orders. Fireflies would never lead advances. They would hang back, hull down behind cover, waiting. Regular Shermans would scout, draw fire, and screen the Firefly. When German armor appeared, the Firefly gunner had one job: kill Panthers and Tigers. Let the 75s handle everything else. This doctrine, born from desperate necessity, would define British tank warfare for the rest of the campaign. German intelligence, meanwhile, was struggling to understand what was happening. Panzer crews reported being hit at extreme range by what appeared to be standard Shermans. Some thought the Americans had finally upgraded their 75mm ammunition. Others suspected new American tank destroyers. A few sharp-eyed German gunners noticed the longer barrel and reported modified Shermans in their after-action reports. But Wehrmacht intelligence, overwhelmed by the invasion, failed to connect the dots. This intelligence failure was compounded by the Firefly's scarcity. With only 1 per troop, German units might encounter 20 Shermans before seeing a Firefly. The modified tanks blended into the mass of Allied armor. German doctrine emphasized killing all Allied tanks quickly, not identifying specific variants. By the time a Panther commander realized he was facing a Firefly, he was often already burning. The Germans had a word for it: Panzerschreck, tank terror. It described the moment when a seemingly inferior enemy suddenly killed you from impossible range. German tankers had inflicted Panzerschreck on the Russians, the British, the Americans. Now they were experiencing it themselves. Panthers that thought they were safe at 1,500 yards were exploding. Tigers, supposedly invulnerable, were being penetrated from the front. The psychological impact was profound. Oberleutnant Friedrich Körner, commander of a Panther in the Panzer Lehr Division, survived an encounter with Fireflies near Caen in July. His post-war testimony, preserved at the Imperial War Museum, is illuminating. "We were engaging British tanks at 1,200 meters. Standard procedure: We'd already knocked out 2 Shermans. Then my driver shouted. Our frontal armor, the glacis plate, had been penetrated. The shell passed between me and my gunner, missing us both by centimeters. It exited through the engine deck. We bailed out immediately. When we examined the entry hole later, I couldn't believe it. The angle of penetration was nearly perpendicular. What gun could do that at such range? We had no answer. By late June, enough reports had accumulated that Wehrmacht intelligence began investigating. Photographs of knocked-out British tanks revealed the longer barrel. Captured Firefly crew members, interrogated at prisoner-of-war cages, confirmed the 17-pounder. German technical intelligence officers examined destroyed Fireflies, measuring bore diameter, studying ammunition. Their conclusions were sobering. The British had fielded a gun superior to the 88mm in armor penetration, in a tank, no less. The German response was predictable and rational. Orders went out to all Panzer units. Identify and destroy the long-barreled Shermans first. They became priority targets, more important than command tanks or artillery observers. Experienced German gunners could spot a Firefly by its distinctive muzzle brake or slightly longer barrel. In theory, this should have neutralized the Firefly's advantage. In practice, it made British deception efforts even more important. Firefly crews responded by becoming masters of camouflage. They painted false muzzle brakes on regular Sherman barrels to confuse German gunners. They removed or disguised the distinctive muzzle brake on the 17-pounder. They wrapped the barrel in fabric to reduce the telltale dust signature when firing. They hung foliage and camouflage nets to break up the turret's profile. Some crews even mounted fake 75mm gun barrels alongside the 17-pounder, though this was rare and unofficial. Squadron leader James Barclay of the Royal Tank Regiment described the cat-and-mouse game. Jerry knew about us by July. We knew they knew. So we played tricks. My gunner painted white stripes on the barrel to make it look shorter. We'd position ourselves behind hedgerows, with only the muzzle showing, looking like a regular Sherman. When a Panther appeared, we'd hit it before they realized what was shooting at them. After each kill, we'd relocate immediately. Jerry would plaster our last position with everything he had. The Germans, desperate for countermeasures, upgraded their tanks. New Panthers received additional frontal armor, increasing thickness to 120mm at optimal angles. This helped against the 17-pounder at extreme range, but not at closer distances. The Königstiger, the King Tiger, entered service with armor too thick for even the 17-pounder to penetrate frontally beyond 1,000 yards. But King Tigers were rare, expensive, and often immobilized by mechanical failures. The Firefly remained deadly. The Battle of Goodwood in mid-July 1944 showcased both the Firefly's strengths and limitations. Operation Goodwood was Montgomery's attempt to break through German lines east of Caen using massed armor. 800 British tanks rolled forward, including roughly 60 Fireflies. They encountered prepared German defenses with dug-in Panthers, Tigers, and anti-tank guns. The result was a bloodbath. British armor losses exceeded 300 tanks in 3 days. But within that defeat lay Firefly success stories. Sergeant Bill Nash of the 61st Reconnaissance Regiment engaged a dug-in Panther at 1,800 yards. His first shot struck the gun mantlet, penetrating. The Panther's main gun drooped, disabled. His second shot went through the turret side armor as the crew bailed out. Nash's troop advanced, crossing terrain supposedly dominated by German armor, because the Firefly could kill at ranges German gunners thought were safe. The importance of crew skill became apparent. The 17-pounder was powerful, but difficult to use. Its high velocity meant minimal bullet drop at long range, excellent for accuracy. But it also meant a flat trajectory that required precise range estimation. 100 yards error in range meant a miss against a tank-sized target at 2,000 yards. Firefly gunners needed exceptional skill. The British Army, recognizing this, began selecting their best gunners for Firefly duty. Trooper Joe Ekins, who opened this story, was a prime example. A miner from Northamptonshire before the war, Ekins had won the gunnery trophy for his battalion during training. When Fireflies arrived, he was selected immediately. Between August 6th and August 8th, 1944. During the battle to close the Falaise pocket, Ekins would destroy 3 Tiger tanks in separate engagements, all at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. All from his Firefly. His most famous kill came on August 8th. A Tiger, commanded by SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, the same ace who devastated British armor at Villers-Bocage, was operating near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramenil. Ekins spotted the Tiger at approximately 1,100 yards, engaged, and fired. His armor-piercing shell struck the Tiger's turret ring, the weak point where turret met hull. The Tiger exploded. Wittmann, with 138 confirmed tank kills, died instantly. Post-war analysis confirmed Ekins' kill, though Canadian forces also claimed credit. Either way, a Firefly had killed Germany's greatest tank ace. The Falaise pocket in August 1944 became the Firefly's killing ground. As German forces attempted to escape the Allied encirclement, Firefly-equipped British and Canadian units positioned themselves along the escape routes. The 17-pounder's range advantage was devastating. German tanks trying to break through found themselves engaged from distances they thought were safe. Tank after tank exploded, victims of a gun they still didn't fully understand. Sergeant Charlie Workman of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry described the scene. "We positioned our Firefly on a ridge overlooking the road. Jerry tanks were streaming past, trying to escape. We could see Panthers, Mark IVs, everything they had left. Our gunner, Tommy, started firing at 1,600 yards. 1 shot, 1 kill. Reload. Fire. Another Panther burning. We knocked out 7 tanks in 20 minutes. They never saw us. When they finally figured out where we were, we'd already displaced. It was like shooting practice, except the targets shot back." German casualty reports from the Falaise pocket reveal the Firefly's impact. Of approximately 400 German tanks destroyed or captured in the pocket, post-war analysis suggests 150 were killed by 17-pounder rounds. That's roughly 1 Firefly kill for every 2 Fireflies engaged. Considering Fireflies represented only about 8% of British tank strength, their effectiveness was disproportionate. They were killing German armor at 3 times the rate of regular Shermans. By September 1944, as Allied forces pushed into Belgium and Holland, Firefly production had increased. British conversion centers were modifying 200 Shermans per month. Units that had operated with 1 Firefly per troop now had 2 or even 3. Doctrine evolved. Firefly pairs would operate together, one engaging while one reloaded, maintaining constant fire. German armor found itself consistently outranged. The Germans adapted again. Panzer tactics emphasized ambush positions at close range, negating the Firefly's range advantage. They focused on infantry anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust, which could kill any Allied tank at close range regardless of armor. They positioned their surviving Panthers and Tigers in defensive positions, where they could engage British armor as it came over ridges or around corners. The tank war in Northwest Europe became a brutal chess match of positioning and first-shot kills. Operation Market Garden in September 1944, the failed attempt to capture bridges across the Rhine, highlighted the Firefly's limitations. In urban combat and close terrain, the 17-pounder's range advantage meant nothing. German anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts could engage at under 100 yards, where every tank was vulnerable. Several Fireflies were lost to infantry anti-tank weapons at Arnhem and Nijmegen. The lesson was clear. The Firefly was supreme in open terrain, but vulnerable in close quarters like any other tank. Winter 1944 brought the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive. British XXXX Corps, including numerous Firefly-equipped regiments, moved to block the northern shoulder of the German advance. Here, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, Fireflies proved their worth again. German tank columns, already crippled by fuel shortages, found themselves engaged by British armor at extreme range. Panthers that thought they were safely positioned found 17-pounder shells crashing through their armor. The psychological impact on German morale was measurable. Prisoner interrogations revealed that Panzer crews specifically feared British tanks with the long gun. Some German units reported refusing to advance when Fireflies were spotted. The tables had turned. For years, British tankers had feared Panthers and Tigers. Now, German tankers feared the Firefly. By early 1945, as Allied armies closed on the Rhine, roughly 800 Fireflies were in service. They represented only about 7% of British tank strength, but accounted for an estimated 30% of German armor kills. The mathematics were undeniable. The Firefly was the most effective Allied tank killer of the war. Not the Sherman, not the Pershing, not even the Soviet T-34. The humble Firefly, a British gun mounted in an American tank, held that distinction. The final months of the war saw Fireflies leading the charge into Germany itself. As British Second Army crossed the Rhine in March 1945, Firefly troops led the armored spearheads. German resistance was collapsing, but scattered Panther and King Tiger units fought on. Firefly crews continued racking up kills, their 17-pounders punching through even the heaviest German armor. By war's end, individual Firefly crews had destroyed dozens of German tanks each. German tankers, interviewed after the war, consistently identified the Firefly as the Allied tank they feared most. Oberleutnant Karl Bromann, a Panther commander captured in the Ruhr pocket, was blunt. "Your Sherman with the long gun was worse than our Tiger. The Tiger was big, obvious, and there weren't many of them. Your long gun Sherman looked like every other Sherman until it killed you from a kilometer away. We never knew which Sherman was the deadly one until it fired." That uncertainty was terrifying. The technical specifications tell part of the story. The 17-pounder fired a 17-pound solid shot at 2,900 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, it could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor plate at 30 degrees angle. A Panther's frontal glacis was 80 millimeters thick at 55 degrees angle. The math was simple. The 17-pounder could punch through Panther frontal armor at nearly any combat range. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 could not reliably penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor beyond 500 yards unless hitting a weak spot. But raw numbers don't capture the human element. Firefly crews were volunteers, often the best gunners in their squadrons. They knew they'd be priority targets once identified. They knew German doctrine called for killing them first. They accepted that responsibility because the 17-pounder gave them a fighting chance. After years of driving undergunned tanks into battle, British tankers finally had a weapon worthy of their courage. Trooper Harry Playford, a Firefly gunner with the 11th Armored Division, described the psychology. "When you're in a regular Sherman, you know any Panther can kill you before you can hurt it. You accept it because you're a soldier, but it gnaws at you. In a Firefly, the equation changed. I could kill a Panther before it killed me, if I was good enough, if I was fast enough. That made all the difference. We weren't victims anymore. We were hunters." The Firefly's success had strategic implications beyond the battlefield. It proved that technological innovation didn't require designing entirely new weapon systems. The British had taken an existing American tank and an existing British gun and combined them into something greater than the sum of parts. It was improvisation, adaptation, and engineering excellence. It was also cheaper and faster than designing new tanks from scratch. American observers initially dismissed the Firefly as a stopgap measure. They believed their upcoming M26 Pershing, with its 90mm gun, would be superior. When Pershings finally reached Europe in February 1945, they proved excellent tanks. But there were never more than 20 in combat at once. Meanwhile, 800 Fireflies were hunting German armor across the front. Quantity and immediate availability trumped theoretical superiority. The British continued producing Fireflies even after Germany surrendered. Plans existed to deploy them to the Pacific Theater for the invasion of Japan. The 17-pounder could penetrate any Japanese tank from absurd ranges. But Japan's surrender in August 1945 made this unnecessary. Fireflies served on in British service through the late 1940s, seeing action in Korea with limited effectiveness against dug-in positions. The legacy of the Firefly extended beyond World War II. Post-war British tank design prioritized firepower, directly influenced by Firefly experience. The Centurion tank, Britain's first truly successful post-war design, mounted a 17-pounder from the start. Later variants carried even larger guns. The lesson was clear. In tank warfare, the ability to kill enemy armor at range was paramount. The Firefly had proven that principle definitively. For the Germans, the Firefly represented a turning point they couldn't reverse. By the time they fully understood the threat, Allied superiority in numbers, industrial capacity, and firepower was overwhelming. The Firefly was just one piece of that superiority, but it was a crucial piece. It neutralized Germany's qualitative advantage in armor. It made Panthers vulnerable. It gave British crews confidence. Those intangible factors mattered as much as penetration statistics. Modern historians debate the Firefly's exact impact. Some argue it was decisive, turning the tank war in Northwest Europe. Others contend it was merely one factor among many, including Allied air superiority, numerical advantage, and German fuel shortages. The truth lies somewhere between. The Firefly didn't win the war alone, but it ensured British armor could compete on equal terms with German Panthers when it mattered most. The men who crewed Fireflies don't debate. They know what that 17-pounder meant. Joe Eakins, who destroyed 3 Tigers, including possibly Michael Whitman's, never claimed to be a hero. He was a gunner who did his job. But he acknowledged the Firefly gave him the tools to do that job effectively. Without it, he'd likely have died in a burning Sherman like so many of his comrades. With it, he survived the war and helped destroy Germany's most dangerous tanks. Today, surviving Fireflies are displayed in museums across Britain. The Tank Museum at Bovington maintains several in running condition. Visitors marvel at that impossibly long barrel extending from the Sherman's turret. Enthusiasts debate technical specifications, armor penetration values, combat records. But standing before a Firefly, what strikes you is its purposefulness. This wasn't an elegant machine. It was a brutal, effective weapon designed to kill German tanks before they could kill British crews. The story of the Firefly is ultimately a story about adaptation under pressure. The British Army in 1943 faced technologically superior German armor. They couldn't design new tanks fast enough. They couldn't wait for better American tanks that might never come. So they improvised. They took what they had and made it work. That practicality, that refusal to accept defeat, defined the British war effort. When Trooper Joe Ekins looked through his gun sight on that June morning in 1944 and centered his crosshairs on a Panther, he represented thousands of British tankers who'd fought and died in inferior machines. The Firefly gave them a chance to fight back. That 17-pounder, firing from a modified American tank, crashed through German armor at ranges Panther crews thought were safe. The shock of that first hit, the realization that British tanks could now kill at extreme range, rippled through the Wehrmacht. The Germans never truly adapted to the Firefly. They tried, implementing target priority doctrines and up-armoring Panthers. But by the time they understood the threat, Too many Panthers were already burning wrecks, victims of a gun they'd underestimated. The Firefly remained deadly until war's end, feared by German tankers, trusted by British crews, proof that sometimes the best solution isn't the most elegant, just the most effective. In the end, roughly 2,000 Fireflies served in Northwest Europe from June 1944 to May 1945. They destroyed an estimated 2,000 German tanks and assault guns. One Firefly kill for every Firefly built. No other Allied tank achieved that ratio. The Sherman Firefly, born from desperation and built from improvisation, became the deadliest tank killer of the Western Front. And the Germans, focused on Tigers and Panthers, never saw it coming until a 17-pound shell came crashing through their armor from 2,000 yards away.